It strikes me that when we talk about universities revisiting and confronting their past, one of the things we should spend some time talking about is what was their past. And here I'm not concerned just with human connections towards slavery, right? Of course, institutions as well as faculty members owned human beings. One of the first things the University of Alabama did when it received its state charter, even before any students were there, was that it went out and purchased Ben, a human being. They broke up families. One of the next things that happened at the University of Alabama after it received its charter was somebody donated a family of human beings to the university, and the university instructed its lawyer to sell the family members individually so they could get more money. Students were assaulted on campus. One of my favorite examples along these lines is Frederick Barnard, who after the Civil War was president of Columbia College and a great advocate of women's education. Barnard College, Distinguished Women's College in New York City, is named after him. Before the Civil War, though, he was a professor of the University of Alabama and president at Ole Miss, where he owned human beings, some of whom were assaulted. Females, slaves assaulted by students. Faculty beat students, and students were, of course, drawn vastly disproportionately from the slaveholding classes. But I'm interested here in intellectual connections. That is, how did faculty contribute to pro-slavery thought through their scholarship, and how did they propagate pro-slavery thought in their teaching? Right? These are areas in which I think schools have a particular obligation to go back and revisit what they contributed to the institution of slavery, drawing on their stock in trade, which is knowledge. And here there are many, many examples one can go through. William and Mary, I understand, is on the verge of releasing a report drafted by Robert and the University of Pennsylvania historian detailing its connections to slavery and perhaps calling for an apology. The intellectual connections are many, right? Thomas Dew, their president, and also a history professor there, wrote one of the leading pro-slavery treatises in the country. It was published in 1832 in the wake of the Nat Turner Rebellion. Beverly Tucker, the law professor there, spent a lot of time teaching in his classes as well as writing in Southern literary journals about the virtues of slavery and how it contributed to the institution of republicanism. Randolph-Macon's president, William Smith, wrote a treatise, published a treatise that was his lectures for the senior class in his course on slavery. These examples could be multiplied at many, many institutions: Transylvania, South Carolina College, Howard College, which is now Samford University in Birmingham, put up a monument to a faithful slave who was killed in a fire. The University of Alabama spent a lot of time, students spent a lot of time there listening to literary addresses justifying Southern schools precisely because they taught pro-slavery doctrine. My favorite example along these lines, though, comes from the University of Georgia. Thomas Cobb, the co-founder of its law school, is one of my favorite scholar activists. After writing a 500-page legal history of slavery, which concluded that we need slavery, more slavery, went off, was a leading secessionist during the Georgia secession debates, and then became a general in the Confederate Army and died on the battlefield at Fredericksburg. He's a person committed to putting his ideas into action. There are other examples one could talk about here. Jim Campbell is far too modest in talking about what happens at Brown. Though there are many connections between Brown and the institution of slavery, one of, I think, the more important connections that has gotten substantially less attention recently is the connections of Brown to anti-slavery. Francis Wayland, Brown's president in the years leading into Civil War, one leading anti-slavery activist, was debated frequently. Other Baptist ministers over the appropriateness of slavery. And I think that's one of the stories that we should also be telling, right? Capturing an accurate history, not just the way in which institutions contributed their intellectual muscle to promote slavery, but the ways in which they attempted to defeat it. So, then we get to these issues of how we might remember all of this stuff on campus. Right? Southern schools are littered with buildings named after leading pro-slavery thinkers. On my campus, the University of North Carolina, we have a Ruffin building named after one of the most vicious pro-slavery jurists in the country. I'm actually not in favor of taking that name down for at least two reasons. One, I think it allows people to forget that the era of slavery ever existed. And second, and perhaps more controversial, maybe we should be putting up more statues and buildings named after Ruffin, because I think he was such a poor advocate for the institution of slavery. He actually did more to defeat it than to promote it. But we can talk a lot about that as we go on. Josiah Knott, who was a physician in Alabama, taught at the University of Alabama's medical school. There's a building named after him on the Alabama campus. Irony of ironies, it was the biology building for many, many years. One of the reasons this is ironic is Knott was a polygenicist, right? He thought Africans and white and Caucasians had different racial origins, and the biology building is named after this guy. Anyway, there are all sorts of other examples one can go along on these lines. But I'll conclude with a thought from James Henry Hammond's Mudsill speech, right? That people at the time understood that there were important connections between the institution of slavery and higher education. Hammond justified the institution of slavery, among other reasons, because it made possible for white people to have the wealth and the leisure time to obtain an education. Thanks very much.